Mississippi Hee Haw's Joy Reid is a menace. She says there's just a small degree of difference between what Nick Fuentes and the GOP believes. Nick Fuentes, of course, is the Holocaust denier. Watch this.
They don't believe in elections. They don't necessarily like the idea of democracy. Mike Lee said democracy is a bad idea. They don't like the idea of women controlling their bodies. They clearly wouldn't mind having a dictator because they don't think that elections matter. They think they should just decide who the president of the United States is. They hate the culture. They're angry that the culture is too friendly to LGBTQ people. I see a very small degree of difference between what he believes and what they believe. I don't see it.
Oh my goodness, hide the women and children. But I want to focus right now on Joy Reid's argument that states with the strictest gun laws have the lowest gun violence rate.
6 out of the 10 states with the least gun violence deaths have the strictest gun laws. California, Hawaii, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey. Mississippi has the least strict gun laws in the country and the highest gun violence rate. The top 5 states in gun violence in order: Mississippi, Louisiana, Wyoming, Missouri, and Alabama. The United States has 120.5 guns for every 100 people. The next closest country is Yemen, then Serbia, then Montenegro. You go all the way down. And as you said, this is the country with the most murders by far. There is no country that's not at war that has more gun murders. It's the reason it's much more comfortable going to a bar in New York City where they're not carrying guns than it is to go in Atlanta where they can carry in a bar. It's like, it seems like it's so obvious, but Republicans go, oh, there's nothing we can do about it. But a lot of states are doing something about it.
Wow. Now, the White House says it's, quote, keeping a close eye, close quote, on Twitter because of misinformation. But over at Mississippi Hee Haw, the Sharpton channel, well, where's Big Brother when you need him? Joining me to discuss this is John Lott of the Crime Prevention Research Center, website crimeresearch.org. John, I know you heard Joy Reid. You probably have a few disagreements.
I don't even know where to start on the stuff but just on the last thing about going into bars, whatever people carrying. The thing is, the people who have concealed carry permits in places like Georgia are incredibly law-abiding. These people are convicted of any type of firearms-related violation at about 1/12 the rate that police officers are convicted of firearms-related violations. And police officers are convicted at about 1/20th the rate of the general population. So, the people who may be shooting each other are not concealed carry permit holders. But, just before that, she was talking about gun ownership rates in different countries. She's relying on something called the Small Arms Survey, which is basically funded by George Soros. And if you go and read their data set, they will not tell you the source for the vast majority of the countries that they have. Out of about 210 countries, they'll have references for 25 of them. Most of those are from a survey back in about 2005 or so, and they just extrapolate, God only knows how, to get to what they think is the current rate. I've asked for years to go and get the sources, to get the data that they have, the raw data. They refuse to do that. So we ended up spending about $70,000. It's a project that we've been working on right now to go and get the number of licenses in different countries. And their numbers are just a joke. I mean, you look at a country like Mexico, they may say it's like, 15 guns per 100 people. Less than 1/10 of 1% of the adult population in Mexico is legally licensed to own a gun. In Brazil, they say it's like 18 guns per 100 people. In Brazil, again, it's less than 1/10 of 1%, at least at the time period when they were doing that. It's gone up a little bit under Bolsonaro. We're legally licensed to own a gun. These are countries like Mexico regularly and Brazil regularly have murder rates that have been 5 to 6 times higher than the murder rate in the United States at the time when their survey was done. So, you look across the world, the countries with the highest gun ownership rates actually tend to have relatively lower homicide rate, and they tend to have relatively lower mass public shootings. So, one of the things I think that she's probably doing there is just comparing the number of murders rather than the murder rate. So that would be kind of like, you live in California, would you go and compare
Right.
the number of murders in California with the number of murders in Wyoming? I assume you wouldn't do that, okay? What you would do is you look at the murder rate, murders per 100,000 people that are there. No respecting journalist, if they're comparing different states, would just compare the number of murders in California with the number in Wyoming or Rhode Island or something like that. They'd put it in terms of the rate. But somehow, when it comes to comparing across countries, the United States has over 330 million people. We're the third most populous country in the world. You have countries in Europe. Germany's the largest with 80 million people, but you have lots of countries there like Norway and Finland, which may have like 5 million people each. You take something like school shootings. Finland, since 2000, has had 2 mass public school shootings. We've had 9, but we have 60 times the population that they have. Are you just going to go and say we have 9 and they have 2 and therefore it's worse in the United States? I assume you wouldn't do that. And now this thing about comparing gun death rates across different states.
Well, she said gun violence. The states with the strictest gun laws have the lowest gun violence
But what
rate.
they're including in the violence are suicides. Okay. One thing you have to understand is that the states that she was mentioning, like Wyoming and what have you, Mississippi, tend to be fairly rural states. And one of the things that you see happen in rural states is that, you have people with farms. And when the husband dies, the wife leaves. If the wife leaves, the husband stays there. And if you're looking at older people, there's a huge sex imbalance for higher ages. You basically see overwhelmingly male populations in these areas. People are lonely and they commit suicide. Okay. And, you're in a rural area, people have guns, they use guns to go and do it. But to go and blame it on the guns per se there's plenty of academic studies out there that basically say there's this other factor that's going on there. But here's the deal. If you look at their rankings, which are pretty arbitrary, they weight different types of laws differently, and they know how to weight these things in order to try to get it, the types of results that they want. And they change the weighting, different laws get different weights in different years, depending upon how crime rates and things like that change, so that they can make the types of claims that they're doing. No respect, they're using like from the Brady campaign or Everytown type rankings of gun laws in different states. No self-respecting academic would use, some rating that changes from one year to another based on how they want to go and skew things. But even if you take their ratings, what you find is that those states that have the biggest increases in gun control, they tend to have the biggest increases in murder rates and violent crime. And so you also have to kind of adjust for pre-existing differences in the states. And they don't try to do that type of stuff. But we go through all that on our website at crimeresearch.org if people are interested.
And John, as you and I have talked about for years, Joy Reid said absolutely nothing about how often Americans use guns to defend themselves. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, well, look, you just had Biden this last week coming out in favor of banning again all semi-automatic guns. And he was making the claim that there's no justifiable reason for why people should want to go and be able to go and have a semi-automatic gun. And it fits your point about them not even thinking about defensive gun uses. Look, if you're going to ban all semi-automatic rifles, what's the alternative? People are going to have bolt action guns that they're going to have to manually reload after each shot gets fired. If a semi-automatic, one pull the trigger, one bullet comes out, it reloads itself, one pull the trigger, one bullet comes out, and so on. But if you have a manually loaded gun and you have multiple attackers going after you, or you fire and miss, or you fire and wound but don't incapacitate the attacker, you may not have the luxury of time to go and manually reload your gun. There's a reason why about 85% of handguns in the United States and a similar percentage of rifles are semi-automatic guns. And somehow the notion, if you were to just go and ban semi-automatic guns, that criminals won't get them, is just not serious. When you see any type of gun control ban like that, what you see is it's the most honest, law-abiding citizens who obey the rule turn in their guns and not the criminals. And what you're going to be doing is making it yet more difficult for law-abiding citizens to be able to be on the level playing field and be able to go and protect themselves against criminals.
You know, John, what people often do is compare us to Great Britain in terms of homicide rates. I interviewed a woman named Joyce Lee Malcolm. She wrote a book where she talked about how for a period of time, America had virtually no real gun control laws, nor did the UK. Right. And she said our homicide rate was still higher. Right. So you can't pin it on guns.
No, that's exactly right. You go back, the first gun control law, her book is Guns and Violence from Harvard University Press. It's an excellent book. And if you go back before, the first gun control laws they had in Britain were 1920. It had nothing to do with concerns about crime. What it was is you just had the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. You had a lot of unemployed soldiers who had just come back from fighting in World War I. And the British government was concerned about a revolution, a communist revolution in the UK. And so they wanted to make it very difficult for working class people to be able to go and own guns. So they imposed a licensing and fee system to make it so that they weren't going to be able to own guns to stop a possible revolution. But it had nothing to do with crime. But if you look before 1920, gun ownership was very common. You can pick up old copies of the London Sunday Times. They have guns advertised all over the place. And they have like walking stick guns, book guns, briefcase guns, you know, everything you could think of. And yet you go look in like 1900, they're like in London, a city of 8.5 million people, they're like 3 gun murders. It just blows your mind how few murders there were with guns at that time. You know, you just think, come on, just accidents. You're going to have something going on there. It's more than that with all these guns that are going on there. And yet you have like 5 armed robberies. I mean, it's just crazy how few crimes that they had. And so Joyce is exactly right. There was something fundamentally different. And the thing is, there have been 3 major gun control laws in the UK, 1920, 1956, 1997. After the 56 and 97 one, murder rates and violent crime rates went up afterwards. In the 8 years after the 97 handgun ban went into effect, homicide rates rose 50% in the UK. They only came back down after that, after there was about an 18% increase in the number of police officers in the country. And even then, after about 16 years, it was only back to about what it was before the increase had occurred, before the ban had taken place. And so here's the thing. You know, lots normal newspaper type discussions is they just look across places. Almost no academics do that because they realize that there could be pre-existing reasons, like we were just talking about in the UK, for why different places have different rates before you even have different types of laws that are there. And so what you want to try to do is to look over time to see how the murder rates in the UK changed when they changed their laws relative to changes that were occurring in other places. That's what we do. That's what I do in terms of my research looking at state rates. I see when states change their rules, how do their crime rates change relative to what they were in the past and relative to other states that weren't changing their rules. And what you find is that after each of these gun control laws in the UK, their homicide rates went up relative to the United States. It's still lower than the United States, but the crucial thing is that it went up relative to the United States when they had those changes.
Last few questions, John. When was the last time you were invited on MSNBC?
I don't know. It's been 10 years, something like that. I mean,
same question. Same question. CNN.
I think the last time may have been Piers Morgan, maybe about 8 years ago, something like that.
Ever any of the morning shows? ABC, NBC, CBS.
I have been on the Today Show twice, but it's been about a decade or so since I've been on one of their shows.
And when was the last time you testified before Congress?
It's been about 2 years since I testified before Congress.
Mm-hmm.
There have been a couple times where Republicans have tried to get me to testify, and Democrats have basically refused to let me testify. But I can't even tell you the number of times, even back years ago, when I would get calls from CNN or MSNBC, where I'd be driving into the studio and I'd get a call back from the producer. In fact, Steve Malzberg's wife used to work for CNN, and she would apologize. She'd say she had set up something with the research director from Everytown, and he objected to having me on as the person that he was going to debate. And so they had to disinvite me there from being able to go and do it. You know, I'm driving into the studio when I get disinvited. You know, I can't even imagine, even back then, going and telling them, well, I'm not willing to talk to somebody else that's there. I assume they just, well, that's too bad, you're not invited. But the fact, even back then, they would let the people on the other side determine who it is that they had to go up against.
Well, the term canceled wasn't around when, in my opinion, you got canceled, John. But you were a rising star in academia, on tenure track, wrote a book called More Guns, Less Crime, and all of a sudden your life turned upside down.
Yeah. No. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but yeah, no, I mean, I had everything from Mayor Daley in Chicago calling up the president of the University of Chicago, telling him that my continued presence at the university was going to do, quote, irreparable harm to the relationship between the city and the school, to two U.S. senators from Hawaii calling up the dean of the Yale Law School when I was there, demanding that, you know, I not be allowed to stay around because I had testified in Hawaii and gotten a gun control bill that they wanted passed killed. You know, and I could go on. There are other stories, but
well, let's end with this, John. However you feel about what happened to you academically, you have saved lives. There are lawmakers who've read your stuff, and there are people who had bad bills killed because people read your material. There are people who are alive because of your work, John Lott.
Well, there are people alive because of you, Larry, and the fact that you've been out there too. We all do our part on this stuff. So your work is greatly appreciated.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, but John, I've not allowed people to be able to defend themselves effectively the way you have. Anyway, John, thank you so much for coming on. God bless.
Thank you, Larry. God bless you too.